You need to leave this seat immediately. First class is not for people like you." Melissa Grant's voice was as cold as steel, slicing through the calm of the cabin. All eyes turned toward David Johnson, a 45-year-old black man seated in 1A. David looked up from his laptop, its screen still filled with dense documents. His gaze was steady, without a flicker of confusion. But inside, old memories surged like an undercurrent. He had heard these words all his life, as a poor boy in school, during job interviews, walking into his first boardroom. Each time, the tone was the same, a knife thrust into his pride. Melissa stood firmly in front of him, arms crossed, her name tag gleaming under the cabin lights. Behind her, Security Officer Eric Park shifted his weight, one hand resting lightly on his radio as if ready to act. To them, David was just someone in the wrong place, someone unworthy of this polished space. He closed his laptop deliberately, his movements slow, intentional. A few passengers whispered nearby, some already raising their phones to record. The air grew thick, no longer filled with murmurs, but with the expectant silence of people waiting for a spectacle. A man dragged from his seat. Melissa leaned in, her voice firm. "Let me see your ticket again." David reached calmly into his jacket, pulled out the boarding pass, crisp, unwrinkled, and handed it to her, his eyes never leaving her face. "Seat 1A, first class," he said, his voice low but unshakable. Melissa lifted the pass high under the light, scrutinizing it like a detective hunting for flaws. Her expression hardened. Then she raised her chin and announced loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "This could have been printed anywhere. Lately there have been plenty of people like you trying to sneak up grades." "People like you." The words hung in the air, heavy, colliding with every gaze. David felt the familiar weight in his chest, the sting of contempt borne by his community for decades. But his face remained still, no muscle twitching. He had learned long ago that reacting only fed the fire. "This seat was purchased legally," David replied, his voice firm as stone. "The booking confirmation is right here." Eric stepped closer, his hand pressing harder against the radio. "You have two choices," he said bluntly. "Leave on your own, or we'll escort you out. Which is it?" At that moment, a passenger in 2B tapped to go live. The words, "Flight 447. Discrimination," appeared on screen, the viewer count climbing from dozens to hundreds within seconds. Around the cabin, more phones lit up, sparks igniting in the heavy air. David allowed himself the faintest smile, barely visible. He leaned in, whispering just loud enough for Melissa to hear if she bent closer. "There's a third choice." But Melissa wasn't listening, or didn't want to. She pulled out her tablet, calling loudly, "Rachel, come to gate 23 immediately. We've got a situation." Minutes later, Supervisor Rachel Howard, only 28, strode in. Her confident walk belonged to someone who had never had to explain why she deserved her position. Her eyes swept over David, her judgment quick and dismissive. "What's the issue here?" "Passenger using a fake ticket. Refuses to move," Melissa snapped. Rachel nodded, then turned to David. "Sir, I understand this is uncomfortable, but we need to resolve this quickly. Others are waiting to board." The livestream counter now read 1,200 viewers. Comments flooded in. It's 20 to 24 and we're still seeing this. Boycott this airline now. David set his briefcase down gently and cracked it open. The edge of a thick file was visible, along with the glint of a platinum card. He closed it again before anyone could read the words. "I'll wait for the captain," he said, each word clear and deliberate. Rachel blinked. "The captain doesn't handle seating disputes. If you don't cooperate, security will remove you. This is your last chance." David's phone buzzed, a calendar reminder. Board meeting Chicago, 3 hours. He dismissed it, his eyes flickering with a quiet light. 30 seconds, he said softly, enough for Rachel to falter. 30 seconds for what? She snapped. For you, David answered, his tone even, to reconsider your stance. The cabin froze. Melissa frowned. Rachel's face tightened. Eric gripped his radio harder. In their eyes, David was still just a stubborn passenger. What they didn't know was that the man they were dismissing held the fate of their entire airline in his hands. The twist hadn't been revealed, but their time, as he had warned, was already down to 30 seconds. No one in the cabin could believe what the man had just said. 30 seconds. The number echoed like a declaration of war. Rachel frowned, her lips pressed tight. She had never been openly challenged by a passenger like this. To her, he was just another unruly man trying to buy time and draw attention. "You're only embarrassing yourself," Rachel said coldly. "Move down to economy class and this will be over." Melissa chimed in, her voice rising. "You should listen. Don't make this worse." The nearby passengers began murmuring. An older man in 3C muttered, "People like that never know their place." But the businesswoman in 1C immediately fired back. "He has a valid ticket. What you're doing is wrong." The live stream from the phone in 2B shot up to 2,000 viewers. Comments flooded the screen. "This is humiliating. Who would ever fly Skybridge again?" David rose slowly. Not rushed, not provoked. He adjusted his tie, carried his briefcase in his right hand, slung his laptop bag over his left shoulder. His tall frame, steady steps, carried no sign of retreat. But he did not walk toward the exit. He walked straight down the aisle, toward the cockpit. "Stop right there," Eric barked, stretching out his arm to block him, his hand gripping the radio, veins standing out in his neck. David stopped. He did not flinch, nor did he show fear. In the dead silence, he slipped a phone from his pocket, unlocked the screen, and held it up for Eric to see. Exactly 3 seconds. Eric's face drained of color instantly. Blood left his lips, his eyes widening as if he had just seen something that threatened his entire career. Without a word, he withdrew his arm and stepped aside, clearing the path. "What did he just show you?" Rachel snapped, stunned. David gave no answer. His fingers moved swiftly, dialing a familiar string of numbers. The ringtone rang once. Then a clear female voice came through the speaker. "Williams Capital Holdings, this is Patricia." The first-class cabin froze. Melissa's breath caught. Rachel went rigid. Passengers leaned in to listen. "Patricia, this is David," he said, his voice calm yet thunderous. "Open the Skybridge Airlines file. I need the acquisition protocol initiated immediately." Each word landed like a blade driven into the quiet carpet of the cabin. Janet, the passenger live streaming, whispered to her viewers, "Oh my God, did you hear that? Acquisition of Skybridge?" The viewer count surged to 5,000, then 7,000. Melissa felt sweat gathering at the back of her neck. Rachel stared at David, shaken to her core, though her face strained to remain composed. You're bluffing! Nobody's going to believe this! But Eric, the security guard who moments earlier had threatened him, stood frozen like a statue. He knew the truth. A flicker in his eyes betrayed everything. David ended the call, slipped the phone back into his pocket, then looked each crew member in the eye. His voice lowered, almost a whisper, yet clear enough for everyone in the cabin to hear. Now, who would like to reconsider their stance? The air in the cabin hardened into stone. An earthquake had just begun. The cockpit door swung open. The sharp click echoed like a gavel striking in the hearts of everyone present. Captain Thomas Reynolds, 50, 3 years old, his face etched with the lines of 2 decades in the skies, stepped out. His uniform was immaculate, his gaze cold and cutting. He had handled dozens of in-flight incidents before, but this time the problem stood right in front of him. What is going on here? Reynolds asked, his voice commanding enough to make the entire cabin hold its breath. Rachel immediately stepped forward, as if she had just found a lifeline. Captain, this passenger is using a fake ticket and has refused to leave first class. We have asked multiple times. Reynolds gave a slight nod, his eyes sweeping over David. There was no curiosity in his look, only judgment. One glance was enough for him to trust his crew. Sir, Reynolds said, his tone like an order, my crew has full authority over seating arrangements. If you do not comply, I will have security remove you from this aircraft. This is your final warning. David stood firm, laptop bag slung over his shoulder, briefcase in hand. His expression remained calm, but inside, old memories surged back, memories of being dismissed, shoved aside, no matter how much harder he worked than others. This time, he would not let the past repeat itself. He pulled out his phone once again. The screen lit up with a name. Michael Peterson, Regional Director. Without hesitation, he pressed call. The ring cut through the silence. Reynolds frowned. Melissa whispered under her breath, "What is he trying to do?" The call connected, and the speaker carried a voice into the cabin. "This is Peterson, who is calling?" David held the phone up in front of Reynolds, his voice steady but resonant. "Michael, this is David Johnson. I'm on flight 447. There is a case of discrimination here involving your crew." The cabin erupted in murmurs, pitted in. A passenger live streaming gasped. "Did you hear that? He just called the regional director directly." The viewer count surged past 12,000, comments flooding in. "Here it is, the turning point. This is going viral." On the other end, Peterson tried to keep his composure. "Mr. Johnson, I am sure this is just a misunderstanding. If you could cooperate with the crew for now, we will review this after." David cut him off, his voice firm as steel. "No, I will not wait until after the flight. I have a board meeting in Chicago in 3 hours, and right now, over 5,000 people are watching live as your employees accuse me of fraud because of my skin color. How do you plan to resolve this?" Peterson faltered. Rachel and Melissa exchanged a glance, their first signs of unease showing. Eric stood frozen, his eyes averted. Reynolds scowled, determined to end what he considered a charade. "Mr. Peterson, give us authorization to remove this passenger. The flight must depart on time." Peterson's voice rang out clearly over the speaker. "Very well, I authorize it. Go ahead and remove him." David slowly ended the call. The simple gesture dropped the atmosphere into a void. He looked straight into Reynolds's eyes. "You have just made a decision that will haunt your career for the rest of your life." The live stream audience erupted. Viewer count skyrocketed past 20,000. The hashtag #flight 447 discrimination began trending nationwide. David drew in a deep breath, then turned to face the entire crew. "You have 15 minutes to make this right." His voice carried, each word heavy as stone, making Melissa's heart race, Rachel falter, and Reynolds clench his fists. They did not yet realize that what was coming was not a threat. It was a sentence. The cabin was frozen in silence. Only the low hum of the air vents and the pounding of hearts could be heard. Captain Reynolds still stood tall, his posture radiating authority like a judge, but his hand was clenched so tightly it had turned white. Rachel tried to maintain her confident stance, yet her eyes betrayed hesitation. Melissa kept her head bowed, her hands trembling ever so slightly. David opened his briefcase. The click of the lock echoed through the silence like a gunshot. Inside, neatly arranged documents revealed bold letters peeking out. Merger Agreement, Williams Capital Holdings, and Skybridge Airlines. A wave of murmurs swept through the cabin. The passenger live streaming from seat 2B gasped, "Oh my God! He has the takeover contract for the airline." The viewer count spiked to 15,000, then 18,000. Comments poured in like rain. "This twist is insane." "Is he the new owner of the airline?" David did not rush. He pulled out his phone, dialed another number, and placed it on speaker. After just one ring, a familiar female voice answered, "Patricia Lee, Legal Department, Williams Capital Holding, speaking." "Patricia," David said, his voice calm. "Prepare the press release. Title it, Skybridge Airlines, Discrimination Incident. Have the legal files ready. I want the full legal team on standby." First class exploded into a deafening silence. Reynolds's mouth hung open. Rachel stood rooted to the floor. Melissa's face turned pale. Eric, who once gripped the radio with authority, now only stared at the carpet, sweat trickling down his temple. Patricia responded immediately. "Understood. I will mobilize the entire legal department. Do you want the release published before or after landing?" David glanced at Reynolds, then swept his gaze across every member of the crew. "Whenever necessary. But I suspect they'll prefer to avoid that." He ended the call. No wasted words. In Reynolds' mind, a terrifying vision flared. Headlines, his name dragged through the mud. His 23-year career reduced to ashes. Rachel staggered back a step, whispering, "My God, this is real." Melissa tried to protest, her voice feeble. You're just bluffing, aren't you?" David tilted his head, a thin smile flickering. "Is that what you think? Then consider this. In the next 6 hours, a deal worth $2.8 billion will close. And after that, every employee record, every disciplinary action, every customer complaint will pass through my hands." The entire cabin froze. His words struck like hammers. Doubt was gone, leaving only fear that spread like wheat-on coffee. The live stream soared past 20,000 viewers. A pinned comment read, "This isn't just a passenger. This is their new boss." David calmly pulled his seat back, sat down, and spread the documents before him like a chessboard. His gaze was razor sharp. The question now isn't whether I stay in this seat. The real question is, after today, which of you will still have a job to return to? The twist had been revealed. True power had shown its face. And the game had only just begun. No one in the cabin dared to blink. The documents spread before David lay like evidence, each bold line a blade aimed at the pride of Skybridge Airlines. He lifted his gaze and looked directly at Captain Reynolds. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of thunder. You call this a standard procedure. In truth, it is a machine that crushes human beings, and it once crushed my family. A shudder rippled through the cabin. Melissa glanced up, her eyes widening. Rachel pressed her lips tight, and Eric swallowed hard. David slowly opened a second compartment of his briefcase. He pulled out a thick black bound file. On the cover, the words stood out in stark print. Maya Johnson, wrongful death investigation. He placed the file on the table and tapped it lightly, the sound like the drumbeat of a verdict. 3 years ago, my sister, a pediatric surgeon, boarded Skybridge Flight 1247. She needed to arrive in time to save a 6-year-old girl on the operating table. Usual. But you, his voice caught for a moment, then sharpened like a blade. You dragged her off that plane. You called her a disruptive passenger. You forced her out just because she looked unfit. The cabin fell into stunned silence. A few passengers covered their mouths. The woman live streaming whispered, "Oh my God, this is horrific." The viewer count surged past 23,000. David drew a deep breath. His voice was no longer an explanation. It was an indictment. Do you know the consequences? My sister collapsed from a heart attack right at the gate. She died on the cold floor. And the little girl she was meant to save also died on the table. 2 lives lost because of a senseless prejudice you dared to call a standard procedure. The last words landed like a gavel strike. Melissa burst into sobs, covering her face with both hands. Rachel turned away, tears breaking loose. Reynolds stood tall, clinging to authority, but his shoulders trembled. David continued, opening his laptop and swiveling the screen for all to see. On it, a presentation scrolled, statistics of 47 cases of discrimination over 3 years. 40. 7 passengers of color dragged off, searched, humiliated in front of crowds. This is not individual error, he said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. This is systemic, a system fed by silence, protected by excuses called aviation security. But the truth is, it is nothing more than fear dressed up as authority. Passengers began whispering. Some lifted their phones to record. The live stream comments rolled like a storm. 47 cases? This is an entire pattern of discrimination. This isn't a mistake. It's a crime. David locked his eyes on Reynolds. And today, you tried to repeat that script with me. But there is one difference. He paused, his gaze like a blade of steel. Today, you targeted the wrong man. I am the incoming owner of this airline, and I will not let my sister's death be in vain. Reynolds opened his mouth, but no sound came. For the first time in his career, the absolute power of a captain in the air dissolved in an instant. David turned into the crew, his voice striking every heart. You've used the name of safety to break human dignity. You've called it procedure, but it was discrimination. Today I say this plainly. Any act of prejudice will be met with immediate termination. Every file, every record, every proof is preserved and live-streamed. There is no escape. The cabin erupted with voices. A woman in seat 1C shouted, "Finally! Someone is speaking for us!" The man in 3C, who had earlier muttered, "People who don't know their place," now sat with his head bowed, his ears burning red. David lifted his phone and dialed. His voice rang out steady, the call placed on speaker. "This is David Johnson. I am filing a formal discrimination complaint to the Department of Transportation, the NOACP, and the Federal Aviation Administration. Date, time, evidence, all documented." That call was no longer a threat. It was the beginning of a federal case. Rachel staggered, nearly collapsing, clutching a seat back for support. Melissa wept uncontrollably. Eric, the guard who once threatened to drag David out, now only whispered, "My God, we're finished." David closed the laptop, returning the file on Maya to his case. But his eyes still burned, as if his sister's spirit was looking through him to demand justice. 3 years ago, I could have sued you, he said slowly. But I chose another path. I built a company powerful enough to buy you. And today, that moment has come. This is not just a deal. This is judgment. First class sat in absolute silence. No one dared to speak. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Only David's voice echoed like a tolling bell in every mind. My sister's name was Maya Johnson. Her death will never be forgotten. And starting today, no passenger will ever again endure that humiliation. Applause broke out from the back of the cabin. Then it spread, growing louder. Passengers rose to their feet, cheering. The live stream climbed past 31,000 viewers. #justice. For Maya exploded across social media. David lowered himself back into seat 1A. He did not smile, nor nod. He simply laid his hand on the file, whispering so softly only he could hear, "Maya, justice has begun." The sound of applause still echoed through the cabin, but the crew had fallen into chaos. Melissa tried to wipe her tears, mascara streaking down her cheeks, whispering, "I didn't know. I was only following procedure," Rachel snapped sharply. "Be quiet. Don't show weakness in front of the passengers." Yet even her own voice trembled. Captain Reynolds stood rigid like stone. In his mind, a single thought spun relentlessly. If what David said was true, then he had just signed the death sentence for his 23-year career. David Johnson sat firmly in seat 1A, his hand resting on the file like a massive seal. His voice carried clearly through the cabin, each word sharp enough that none could be missed. From this moment forward, this airline has a new policy. I call it the Maya Protocol. The policy to protect the dignity of every passenger. Every passenger turned their cameras toward him, recording every word. The live stream count surged past 40,000. "Zero tolerance," David continued. "Any manager or crew member found guilty of discrimination will be suspended immediately. Their record will go straight to the legal department. No exceptions. No leniency." The cabin erupted in whispers. Some passengers clapped again. The woman in seat 1C raised her phone and shouted into the live stream. "Do you hear this? This is a revolution happening on this plane right now." Rachel forced herself to step forward, trying to steady her voice. "Mr. Johnson, I think you're taking this too far. The plane is still operated by the crew. No." David cut her off, his voice sharp as a blade. "The crew lost the right to operate this cabin the moment they chose to treat a passenger with prejudice instead of law." He turned to Reynolds. "Captain Reynolds, your employment contract includes an ethics clause. A violation involving discrimination means your contract can be terminated. Here, right now. Do you want to challenge that before tens of thousands of witnesses watching live?" Reynolds froze, his breath quickening. He tried to speak, but David's piercing gaze stopped him. The phones streaming live glowed like an invisible courtroom. At last, Reynolds lowered his head, his voice barely audible. I understand." Applause roared again, but this time it sounded like a funeral bell for the old order. David went on, his voice slow but heavy as stone. "You have 4 hours. That is the time left before the deal formally closes. In those 4 hours, each member of this crew must decide. Stay and help build a new airline, or disappear along with the disgrace of this day." Melissa lifted her head, her voice shaking. I didn't mean to. I only acted out of habit. Please, give me one more chance." David looked at her for a long moment. In his eyes was not only anger, but grief. "Chance does not come from late apologies," he said. "Chance comes from making the right choice at the beginning. My sister never had that chance." The word sliced through Melissa's last hope. She broke down, sobbing, collapsing into an empty seat. Rachel stood in silence, her face pale as chalk. David slowly rose. He stepped into the aisle, his gaze sweeping every passenger, before turning back to the crew. "I want this to be perfectly clear," he said, his voice carrying like a command. "From this moment forward, this plane will take off, and every flight of Skybridge that follows will fly, not only on jet engines, but on RISC." The man in seat 3C, the one who had muttered his contempt earlier, stood up abruptly. His face was flushed red, his eyes unsettled. "Mr. Johnson, I was wrong. I'm sorry." David stared directly at him. "A late apology does not erase the stain, but at least you had the courage to speak it. Remember this moment and never repeat it." The live stream surged to 55,000 viewers. The hashtag #MayaProtocol began trending. Major news outlets were already commenting live. David returned to seat 1A, opened his laptop, and his fingers typed decisively as he signed the merger documents. The air in the cabin remained tense, but power had shifted hands. He lifted his head one last time, fixing his eyes on Reynolds. "From now until we land in Chicago, this plane is under my command. Captain, you have only one duty left. Get us there safely and on time." Reynolds gave a small nod, his eyes lowered, knowing he was utterly defeated. David closed the laptop, resting his hand on Maya's file. His voice softened, but it still carried through the cabin. "From today, justice flies with us." The landing gear screeched against the Chicago runway. The giant Boeing shuddered, then rolled slowly toward the gate. But in first class, No one exhaled in relief. Everyone understood. The real storm was only just beginning. Through the window, David Johnson saw rows of satellite news vans lined up along the tarmac. Camera flashes erupted like lightning. News had traveled faster than the plane itself. Hashmeyer protocol was flooding Twitter. CNN and NBC had issued breaking alerts, and tens of thousands had gathered at O'Hare just to witness the finale. When the cabin door opened, David rose. He collected his laptop, his case, and the thick folder of documents. Every movement was measured and calm, yet so commanding that the crew lowered their eyes, avoiding his gaze. Reynolds, once the authoritative captain, now stood silent like a defeated soldier. Outside, a voice over the loudspeaker called, "Mr. Johnson, the board has convened in conference room 12A. He descended the metal stairway. Passengers on either side of the path turned to watch, some clapping, some filming. A young black girl clutched her mother's hand, her eyes shining at him, as if seeing a hero. David nodded gently in return. Conference room 12A, with glass walls facing the international terminal, was packed. Michael Peterson, the regional director, sat at the head of the table with 3 attorneys and the crisis communications team. On the large screen glowed the Skybridge Airlines logo. Beneath it, a live ticker. Williams Capital CEO to speak. Flight 447 discrimination scandal. Peterson shot to his feet as David entered. Forcing a smile, he extended his hand. "Mr. Johnson, surely there's been a misunderstanding. We can." David did not shake. He set his case on the table, opened it, and connected his laptop to the screen. The Williams Capital logo blazed to life alongside towering charts. "There is no misunderstanding, Peterson. There are 47,000 live witnesses. There are 3 years of records. And there is the truth. Skybridge Airlines has fostered a culture of discrimination." Keystrokes echoed through the room. Peterson's attorneys scribbled notes, their faces pale. David clicked to the next slide. Revenue $2.8 billion, complaints 312. Settlements $3.5 million. These are the numbers you hid in your annual report. 312 complaints in 3 years. Of those, 47 involved passengers of color. On average, you paid out $75,000 per case to buy silence. $3.5 million in hush money, not counting legal fees and brand damage. How many lives were destroyed for this number? Peterson's face burned red. "Mr. Johnson, please, calm yourself. We suspended those involved. These are isolated incidents, not systemic issues." David played a video. The screen filled with footage of his sister, Maya Johnson, in her doctor's coat, being dragged off a Skybridge flight 3 years ago. Her desperate voice rang out. "I have to save a little girl. Please let me board." The image faded into cold text. "Cardiac arrest. Deceased." The room fell into crushing silence. Peterson's jaw dropped before he shut his mouth and bowed his head. David braced both hands on the table, his voice deep and steady. "This is not an isolated incident. This is systemic. And today, that system ends." He laid down a stack of papers. "Termination list. 5 names printed in bold: Melissa Grant, Rachel Howard, Eric Park, Janet Collins, Thomas Reynolds. Effective immediately. No severance. No letters of recommendation. Grounds: human rights violations. Discriminatory conduct. One attorney leapt up. "Mr. Johnson, this will provoke backlash from the unions," David cut in, his gaze sharp as a blade. "Unions do not protect prejudice. They exist to protect fairness, and fairness will be restored." The glass walls darkened with the press pressed tight against them, cameras aimed. On Twitter, #Skybridge Showdown was trending worldwide. Peterson grasped at straws. "Then what solution do you propose? Firing half the crew will plunge us into crisis. Staffing, media, stockholders." David clicked to the final slide. On the screen appeared the words, "The Maya Protocol." Mandatory bias training, real-time monitoring, automatic suspension, public quarterly reports, a $50 million scholarship fund named after Maya Johnson. This is the solution. This is the future. Anyone unwilling to accept it may leave this room now. No one moved. Peterson's eyes darkened, but outside, thousands of voices were roaring. David closed his laptop and raised his head, staring straight into the cameras through the glass. "This message is for every passenger. From today, these skies belong to everyone. No more discrimination. No more silence. Skybridge Airlines will fly on the wings of dignity." The room was silent, but outside the crowd of reporters erupted. The golden glow of sunset spread across the glass walls of Conference Room 12A. The entire room had become a stage, where every eye and every camera lens focused on one man alone, David Johnson. On the table lay the thick stack of merger documents, neatly arranged. Each page felt like a verdict waiting to be signed. Across from him, Michael Peterson sat in silence, his hands tightly clasped, sweat beading on his forehead. The attorneys lowered their heads, their pens trembling as they scribbled. David pulled out a chair, sat upright, and uncapped a black and silver fountain pen. He did not sign immediately. He lifted his gaze, staring through the glass at the crowd outside, dozens of reporters pressing their cameras against the window, flashes sparking like stars. Beyond them, thousands of people had gathered, their voices echoing in unison. "Justice for Maya! Justice for Maya!" He lowered the pen to the first page. Each stroke was sharp and decisive, like the strike of a gavel. One page, then another, then a third. Every signature closed the book on Skybridge's dark past and opened a new chapter. When he finished, the air in the room felt heavy and still. Then David pushed the folder toward Peterson. "At 3:47 this afternoon," he said, his voice deep and steady, "Williams Capital officially holds 67% of shares. I am now the majority shareholder. I am the new CEO." Peterson collapsed into his chair. One lawyer fumbled for a handkerchief, wiping sweat from his brow. The crisis team sat frozen, their strategies stripped away. David rose. He did not leave immediately, but looked each of them in the eye. "I did not come here for revenge. I came here for change. But change has a cost. Those who used their power to humiliate customers have paid with their careers. Those who choose courage, who stand on the side of what is right, will continue forward in a new sky bridge, one built on transparency, fairness, and humanity. He opened his case and pulled out a new set of papers. Implementation of the Maya Protocol. Starting tomorrow, every employee will undergo mandatory bias training. Every customer complaint will be monitored in real time, with quarterly reports made public. And, his voice softened, his eyes glistening, the Maya Johnson Scholarship Fund, $50 million, will carry on the dreams my sister was forced to leave behind. No one dared to object. Only the frantic typing of communications aides could be heard, racing to broadcast the news. Outside, CNN's ticker blazed across massive LED screens. Williams Capital takes control of Skybridge Airlines, announces historic reform. David drew in a deep breath. He knew this was not just a battle of paperwork. This was the beginning of a long journey. But at the very least, he had won the most important fight, forcing the world to listen. The conference room doors swung open. The hallway erupted in cheers, cameras flashing wildly. David stepped out, the bright lights washing over his face. People raised banners high. No more discrimination. Fly with dignity. He paused in the middle of the hall, lifting the signed documents above his head. The roar thundered, echoing against the glass ceiling. In that moment, David was no longer just a CEO. He was the symbol of resolve, of justice delayed, but never denied. He whispered, just loud enough for the microphones to capture. Justice delayed isn't justice denied. It's justice with compound interest. The line spread like wildfire, repeated across thousands of tweets and millions of shares. And somewhere, David believed, his sister Maya was finally smiling. Conference room 12. 6 months ago, this place had been a battlefield where David Johnson revealed his hand and signed the historic merger. Today, the light was softer, the atmosphere transformed. Instead of the stench of fear, the room brimmed with a new energy, a fragile but growing belief that had spread across the airline. On the glass wall, no longer filled with crisis briefings, a massive screen glowed with triumphant numbers. Discrimination complaints. Down 89%. Employee satisfaction. Up 156%. Customer retention rate. Highest in Skybridge's history. David sat at the head of the table, a thick report open before him, though his eyes never left the screen. His heartbeat was calm and steady. For the first time in years, the sky felt a little lighter. "We are living in a new era," said Sarah Chin, the newly appointed Director of Diversity and Inclusion, an MBA from Harvard and a former official at the Department of Transportation. She was now David's right hand. Since last month, not a single verified discrimination complaint has been filed, and the Equity Watch app, our real-time reporting system, has processed 48 minor reports. Every case was handled transparently and resolved to the satisfaction of both employees and customers. David nodded, his eyes reflecting quiet pride. He remembered the app's launch. One button, one report, complete with GPS coordinates, a photo, and AI verification. No more, we'll look into it later. Now everything was public, undeniable, impossible to ignore. Sarah continued. The Maya Johnson Scholarship has awarded 12 first-year students. They're pursuing aviation, aerospace engineering, and transport management. Their photos hang in the main hall. And here's good news. Some have already been approached by other airlines for research collaborations. Applause spread around the table. David stayed silent, his hands tightening slightly on the polished surface. Inside, warmth surged. Maya, his sister, if she were alive, would surely smile knowing her name had become the foundation for an entire generation's future. He asked, "And what of the employees dismissed 6 months ago?" Sarah opened a folder. Melissa applied for unemployment but denied due to misconduct, now working part-time in retail. Rachel left aviation altogether. No clear direction. Eric working security at a shopping mall. Janet appealed through the union, but the record is stacked against her. Very little hope. And Captain Reynolds. She paused, glancing at David. He agreed to undergo anti-bias training. Not only did he complete it, he achieved the highest score. He now flies domestic routes and volunteers to speak at aviation conferences about the Maya Protocol. Honestly, he has changed. David leaned back slightly. He remembered that stern, commanding face in Flight 447. Now Reynolds stood in auditoriums, speaking about justice. Life, he thought, had its strange way of turning full circle. Not everyone is irredeemable, David reflected silently. Some only need to be forced to face the mirror. The report continued. Skybridge's market share had soared. Its stock had not only recovered, but surpassed pre-crisis levels. On social media, where boycotts once raged, thousands now wrote glowing praise. Fly Skybridge, and you are treated with dignity from check-in to landing. One board member asked, "Are we not concerned the cost of the Maya Protocol is too high? The scholarship fund, the AI system, comprehensive training." David rose, walked to the screen, and pointed at the profit chart. The cost of justice is not a cost. It is an investment. We are not losing money. We are buying back trust. And as you can see, profits this quarter are up 23%. Justice and profit are not opposites. They amplify one another. Applause resounded again. The projector shifted to the next slide. Industry impact. Sarah added, "American Airlines has copied parts of the Maya Protocol. Delta is piloting bias training modeled after ours. United has proposed collaboration." David smiled faintly. He knew this wave would not stop with Skybridge. It would sweep across the industry, erasing prejudices that had lingered far too long. The meeting adjourned. One by one, the others left, until David was alone in the glass chamber. He walked to the window, gazing down at the runway. A Skybridge jet, adorned with its new logo, silver wings embracing a rising light, taxied across the tarmac. In the fading dusk, it was not just a plane. It was a promise. He pulled out his phone, reading a new message from his daughter. "Dad, I've just been accepted into Flight Academy. I'm going to be a pilot, just like Aunt Maya dreamed." David's vision blurred. He typed back softly, "Fly high, my daughter. The sky belongs to you now." In that moment, he knew the 6 months of struggle had not only saved an airline. It had saved the future. 2 years had passed since Flight 447, but the echoes of that day had never faded. David Johnson sat in seat 1A, the seat he always reserved for himself, not to enjoy privilege, but to remember the fateful moment that changed the entire airline industry. On the folding table before him, his laptop was open to a speech. In the corner of the screen, bold letters read, "Maya Williams, Civil Rights and Transportation Act, Congressional Testimony." The plane trembled lightly as it descended into Washington, D.C. Below lay the city where laws were written, where power shaped society. David gazed out the window, his heart steady, but heavy. This time, he was not only representing Skybridge. He was representing millions of passengers who had endured prejudice. In the cabin, a young flight attendant approached, her smile genuine, her eyes warm. Her small name badge read, Patricia Santos. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson. May I bring you some coffee?" David looked up and saw a young woman in her 20s, carrying herself with confidence yet still bearing traces of youth. "Black coffee, thank you," he replied. Patricia set the cup down, then hesitated, her voice trembling slightly. You may not remember, but thanks to the Maya Scholarship, I was able to attend Aviation Academy. The story of your sister Maya changed my life. Today is my very first flight as an official attendant, and I get to serve you." David froze for a moment. He looked at her, emotion swelling inside him. His vision blurred slightly, but a soft smile touched his lips. "Thank you, Patricia. You are proof that Maya never truly left the skies." The plane touched down and taxied toward the congressional terminal. Outside, lines of news vans stretched along the tarmac. Camera flashes burst like lightning. The story had traveled faster than flight itself. Maya protocol blanketed Twitter. CNN and NBC carried breaking news, and thousands gathered at O'Hare just to witness the outcome. When the cabin door opened, David rose. He gathered his laptop, his files, and the thick folder of documents. His movements were unhurried, calm, yet so commanding that the crew avoided his gaze, heads bowed. Reynolds, once the all-powerful captain, now stood silently like a soldier defeated. Outside, a voice called through the loudspeakers. "Mr. Johnson, the board has convened in hearing room 12A. He descended the metal stairs. Passengers lining the path turned to watch, some applauding, others recording video. A little black girl clutched her mother's hand and looked at him with shining eyes, as if gazing at a hero. David nodded gently in return. In the hearing room, he sat before a panel of lawmakers. The microphone was on. Hundreds were present, and millions were watching online. David began, his voice deep and resolute. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am here not only as the CEO of Skybridge, but as the brother of Maya Johnson, a pediatric surgeon who died because she was subjected to discrimination at an airport. Her death not only stole one life, it stole the chance of life for a child she was on her way to save. And we cannot allow another Maya to fall." He opened a slideshow. A chart appeared. Discrimination complaints down 92% since the Maya Protocol was enacted. Airline revenue up 27%. "We have proven something undeniable," David continued. "Equity is not just morality. It is a business strategy. It builds trust. It drives profit. It sustains the future. And now it is time to make it federal law." The room grew quiet. A congressman tapped his pen and nodded. A congresswoman wiped her eyes as an image of Maya appeared on the screen. A young woman in a white coat, her smile gentle. David lowered his voice, solemn. My sister is gone, but her legacy lives in every flight, every employee, every passenger. Let us ensure that her legacy belongs not only to one airline, but to this entire nation. Pass the Maya Williams Act. Applause thundered through the chamber, echoing against the walls. Cameras swung to capture David's determined face, while the hashtag #MayaWilliams Act shot to the top of global trends. That evening, back in his hotel room, David unlocked his phone. A message from his daughter lit up the screen. Dad, today I completed my first solo flight. Aunt Maya must be proud. David sat by the window, looking out at the glittering lights of Washington. He typed back, Maya is flying with you, and with the whole world. Out there, the sky stretched wide. But this time, it was no longer the sky of privilege. It had become the sky of justice, where every flight carried a promise that every passenger deserved dignity. David closed his laptop, sipped the last of his warm coffee, and shut his eyes. In his heart, he heard again the applause of millions, and deeper still, the familiar whisper, Maya, we did it. In the world of business, justice does not always arrive through reports or profit figures, but through the steadfastness of one person brave enough to say no to injustice. David Johnson transformed the pain of losing his sister into a fire of reform. And that fire did not only illuminate the skies of aviation, it spread across society itself. His story reminds us that respect is not a privilege. It is a fundamental right of every human being. And every action, no matter how small, can become the spark that changes an entire system. If you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, hit like and subscribe so you will not miss the next inspiring stories. Before you go, leave a short comment of just 3 words. Justice takes flight. A reminder that in our skies, fairness must always fly alongside the wings.